Has Sir Keir Starmer just handed over an obscene amount of British taxpayers' money in a so-called surrender deal over the Chagos Islands? And what does this mean for Britain's global standing and our hard-earned cash? Hello, I'm Miriam Cates and this is GBN Originals. Now, the Prime Minister has confirmed a deal with Mauritius that critics across the political spectrum are labelling a capitulation. Starmer claims the deal will cost £101 million annually, amounting to £3.4 billion over 99 years. However, the Telegraph has calculated the true cost will be more likely to exceed £30 billion. Now, these additional sums have been committed to fund economic development in Mauritius, a country that has never before owned or even had a legitimate claim to the Chagos Islands. And all this, the government maintains, is necessary so that Britain can keep the vital Diego Garcia military base. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says this is good value for money, comparing it to the running costs of an aircraft carrier. But let's remember, we're not buying an aircraft carrier here. We're renting a base that we already control to a country 1,300 miles away from the islands, and we're paying through the nose for the privilege. And where is this money coming from? Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, keeps warning us about the £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Yet somehow the taxpayer must find money for this project. And specifically, the cost will come out of the defence budget, meaning that real military spending will decrease rather than increase as the government has promised. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called the deal dangerous and told the BBC, "Our country is getting poorer and it is getting weaker because of the decisions that Labour is making. Donald Trump is laughing at the Chagos deal. He's welcoming it because he's not going to have to pay very much, if anything at all. He's got a great deal at the expense of the UK. That's not right. It hasn't been done in our national interests." But of course, this isn't just about money. It's about the principle, it's about sovereignty, and it's about our priorities. Why are we being so quick to hand over vast sums to Mauritius when our own people are struggling? Why is the government so willing to bend over backwards to appease non-binding opinions of international courts and foreign governments while ignoring the concerns of ordinary Brits? And let's not forget the geopolitics. The Prime Minister claims this deal will stop China or any other nation from setting up their own bases nearby. But one of the clauses of the agreements commits Britain to informing Mauritius, an ally of China, any time we want to undertake military action. Surely this deal is a threat to our long-term national security. Now, earlier today on Good Afternoon Britain, we sat down with Mike Tapp, MP, and Grant Shapps, the former Defence Secretary, to discuss this. Take a look. We do have Sir Grant Shapps on the line now. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Now, of course, you were party to some of this classified information when you were Defence Secretary. Did you see anything in that that made you think that it was inevitable that we do some sort of deal with Mauritius?
Absolutely nothing. And I cannot keep quiet today whilst I hear the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary and other ministers going out and claiming there was some inevitability that we absolutely had to hand this sovereignty away, pay for the pleasure of doing so, and we discover in the small print, ask permission from the Mauritians, 2,000 kilometres away, whenever we take any military action from there. It's an outrageous claim by ministers. It's not true. I've been privy to all of the top secret information on this. I can't go into the details, but I can tell you that this is just a weak-willed approach, claiming that they had no choice when they absolutely had a choice to defend our sovereignty, and this is a disgraceful outcome.
What does the government mean, then, when they talk of the electromagnetic spectrum that is, of course, governed by a UN agency? They say that we could lose access to that spectrum that is so vital for satellite communications, for transmissions of all sorts of kinds, if the legal status of this island is put in jeopardy by the UN-regulated spectrum, so argues the Prime Minister, would also be in jeopardy.
I'm afraid the Prime Minister, a human rights lawyer, is just too prepared to follow whatever the lawyers happen to be recommending as advice, in the same way as when you're a minister, you listen to lawyers and you listen to solicitors, but you come to your own decisions when advisors advise. You don't simply cave in to whatever they say. Now, the original ruling by the International Court of Justice is an advisory ruling. It was made by, amongst others, one of the judges, Shui Hang Xing. She was formerly of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Do you really think that they were thinking about this through British eyes? I very much doubt it. And it was advisory. You know what? Our partners on the Chagos Islands, the people actually using it, the Americans, they don't even recognize the International Court of Justice. And this isn't some sort of Trump extreme. They've never signed up to the ICJ. So why on earth we feel that we have to hand away our sovereignty, pay for the privilege, and it turns out ask for permission when we use our own facilities to an island, to Mauritius, who have never, ever owned this, is beyond belief. And, I can't quite decide whether it is the government being unpatriotic, not understanding the extent to which it's important that we look after our national security, or if they're just completely ignorant of the damage, which is in some ways just as bad or worse. I hope it's the latter, because if it's the former, then they're genuinely acting on behalf of those who seek to harm us.
Grant, how much of this do you think is to do with a certain political friendship between the Prime Minister and one of his oldest friends, Philip Sands KC? Philip Sands KC has been working for the Mauritian government on the side of this. He's known to be going to the football with the Prime Minister from time to time. He's the author of a book called The Last Colony, a tale of exile, justice and Britain's colonial legacy. And indeed, weirdly, in the agreement signed, there are right there on the first page are words about decolonisation and legacy. I mean, is this a political idea?
It's the only possible explanation for doing something which is so much in the interests of our own national strategic decline that there cannot be another reason for doing this. So, in other words, they have put their ideology ahead of our national and international security. They have handed something which will end up being in the influence overall of the Chinese, who are increasing their pressure on Mauritius, will end up with very little control what they do in some of these other islands. And this government has caved in to, as I say, a bunch of sort of lawyers, very much of the type that Keir Starmer might listen to, including, outrageously, somebody who's not declared their interests, but has written extensively about abandoning Britain's role in the world, which includes, I have to say, having bases in strategic locations around the world, which, in ways that I can't go into in huge detail, are immensely important to our national security. I think it's unbelievable that they paid tens of billions of pounds for this. If you think that the winter fuel payment that's caused so much fuss, it's about £2 billion a year. They're paying up to 100 billion, at least 30. It depends how you account for it. And it's certainly not the 3 billion that the government's trying to tell you.
Grant Shapps, thank you so much for joining us there. And of course, we did have Mike Tapp, Labour MP, on earlier, saying that had they not done this deal, it would become impossible to defend Diego Garcia, which I still don't quite understand. I'm not sure which country was going to invade the islands, but anyway, there's obviously a suspicion.
I mean, invading those islands where the British and the Americans are, I mean, declaring war on the United States of America. The last time a country tried to declare war on the United States of America, it did not go particularly well.
Exactly. Yes, well, it is, I think lawyers live in a different world. Anyway.
For joining us. In fact, we'll put some of those points now to the Labour Member of Parliament for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp. Mike, this is a cost that we are now paying to have a base that we, until yesterday, had for free.
Well, look, the Conservatives, and Tom knows full well that there were big questions over us securing this base long term, and there's a risk assessment being carried out here in the interests of national security, and this base is like an unsinkable warship in the Indian Ocean, and that's what we've got to consider here. We've launched missions going into the Middle East, into North Africa, and it's vital for future security, particularly with the threats that are growing globally. And that's why we've done this. We're putting national security first. The Conservatives know that. They started these negotiations, and to be quite frank, I'm disappointed that they're playing these political games.
But Mike, a lot of our viewers will wonder why the government, the British government, is putting international law. Some of these judgments are not binding, they're advisory. I mean, the US isn't even signed up to the ICJ. We're partners with them in the base at Diego Garcia. They will ask, why is a British government putting international legal advice above British national security?
Well, actually, it's quite the opposite. We're putting British national security first here. There were advisory rulings, you're right, in 2019 and 2021. And the risk assessment that's being carried out here is that if this continues and this were to go to court, which was highly likely, then we may lose that sovereignty. At the same time, while that's happening,
but we're only losing sovereignty on paper, in the opinion of international judges. Are you expecting it's going to be invaded by another country?
No. While that's happening, an order would go down, which means we wouldn't be able to operate from that base. We would lose vital national security infrastructure because of that.
Who would physically stop us from operating from that base?
Well, look, the moment these orders go down, if we ignore them, then a lot of the assets that we use within the base, involving Five Eyes and other nations, would fall down because they would also follow those advisories. So things like that satellite coverage, launching RAF missions and military missions from there wouldn't happen.
Do you think the French or the Americans, who aren't signed up to the ICJ, would actually cut that on the basis of some international legal opinion?
This is about national security and certainty of the future of that. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but what we can say is that an educated legal risk assessment has been conducted here, and what's best for our national security is to ensure we've got over a century of using that base for our operations. And with the threat from China, for example, holding that base is vital. It's an unsinkable warship which we have to maintain and continue operating from.
And yet we haven't got the same sort of access to this base that we previously did. I mean, if we look to Annex 1B1 of the agreement, we'll see that any armed attack that takes place from Diego Garcia now, we must inform Mauritius of any armed attack on a third state. I mean, that sounds like we've lost
Tom,
a lot of
I like you because you always do your research. But look, what it doesn't say there is before that is launched. And look, once we've got jets up in the sky, it's pretty obvious what's happening, isn't it? So, look, for me, that's not in any way a threat. I'm sure our top spies will have been involved in this assessment to ensure that it's secure going forward.
What recourse do we have if Mauritius was to renege on the deal in some way?
Well, this is a solid deal, and this has got the support.
Right now, but who knows which government will be in power in Mauritius in 10 years, how close they'll be to China in 20 years, we don't know.
This is a solid deal that we've signed. It's got the support of the Americans, Five Eyes, NATO. The people who are against it are Russia, China, Iran, the Conservatives and Reform.
Is there any evidence that China is against it?
I can assure you, they do not want an unsinkable warship operating in that area.
This is the implication of the Prime Minister. I find this argument a very strange one.
The Chinese...
Because there's the assertion of the Prime Minister that the Russians and the Chinese are against it, but I haven't seen a single word, a single press release, a single argument from these countries that they're against it.
The Chinese, as we know, pose a threat to Taiwan. Us holding this unsinkable warship, as I've said, in this strategic position could be vital in the future, which is why the Americans support it.
It just seems very, very strange that the argument seems to rest upon the idea that someone would attack or somehow undermine the operational independence of a NATO base with the most well-equipped armies of the world on it. I just find it very, very strange and legalistic.
This is about...
That you think that Donald Trump's America would pay heed to some advisory ruling in the UN over and above the operation of one of our joint bases.
This is about keeping the base running. And as you know, you've done your homework within the deal. Our foreign adversaries can't use the islands surrounding it for their own bases. The moment an order goes down, they'd be able to do that.
Now, we must get to one other issue, Miriam.
Yes, so migration figures yesterday, quite a significant fall in net migration, 50% down on the year before. Now, of course, the reason for this is that the Conservatives made some reforms at the very end of the last Parliament, reducing student visas, increasing their salary cap. Now, of course, Conservatives are responsible for such high levels of immigration in the first place. But you put out an interesting tweet yesterday that seemed to claim credit for the Labour Party for that fall in migration. It's not quite correct, is it?
Well, look, what I haven't done there is said anything about the Conservative Party. I'm talking about reform, spinning this, and what they're doing is they're saying to us, oh, well, it's not enough. Look, we've only had under a year, and of course we're building on that. Look, if there's...
that's a fair point, but the tweet says this Labour government halving net migration.
Well, Yvette Cooper is running the Home Office. It's Yvette Cooper who's kept any measures in place that might have been there.
And if you look at the white paper, which is the report of last year's figures, is a result of those Conservative reforms.
It's not just last year's figures. Well, sorry. My apologies.
This year's figures.
24.
Yeah.
Labour have been in government for a large part of that. We've kept in place any measures that we thought would work, and we're moving forward with harder measures.
Did row back on the increased spousal visas. So actually, it would have been even lower had you kept all of the Conservative
If you look at the white paper measures that we're going to be implementing, that's going to bring this down even further, creating jobs for British workers and putting them first so we're not relying on outside workforces. This is something we take very seriously. We're going to bring down net migration. We're bringing in counter-terror powers to tackle illegal migration too.
Now, experts say it might be brought down by about 50 to 100,000. Would you be comfortable with a 300,000 level of net migration?
Look, we haven't put a figure on this. I want to see it go as low as possible. And what I mean by possible is it needs to be linked with skills training, education and the jobs market, so we're putting British workers first, essentially.
OK, Mike Tapp, thanks very much indeed for joining us live in the studio. Now, Donald Trump.
So what do you think? Is this deal a necessary evil or a national embarrassment? Should we be spending British taxpayers' money propping up foreign economies, or should we be looking after our own? Well, let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel for more.